driving under a bridge by squad cars, high beams toward the homeless near Franklin, where snow didn't need to be stead. Rolling stones they have to find elsewhere. A few days later, in encapsulating fog, my tires tread on Hiawatha, axles gearing to take Cedar Riverside, the Capella and Wells Fargo towers to the north, their heads above water, while everything else is drowned by clouds. To my left, another encampment starting anew, with 2 or 3 tents, a stark contrast ringing in my ear. Alul Derexen, Alul Bahan Kamanhab. A full stomach doesn't sympathize with a hungry one. My 9th-floor balcony overlooks a part of this lead section. Somali is sympathetic to the plight of him who can't afford a wheelchair, forced to carry his cup between his teeth for change as he crawls, plastic bags on his feet and on his arms. The homeless man here is fortunate for one thing. Everyone around him looks like him. People walk by. Whoever can afford it throws something into his cup. The same way some toss change into the Emma way wishing well. Some can't afford it, but on their faces you see the grimace of pain. They share a part of his hurt, as though he were their own brother. If the hostile architects who put dividers on benches felt this way, would they still endeavor to deter the homeless from sleeping there? If those who plant metal spikes under bridges shared that same grimace for a pain not theirs, would the blueprints ink bleed the same? Is it an issue of poverty or an issue of race? Under the bridge in Phillips, the majority are minorities. They've seen better days. And even though it's not always black and white, the officer shining his squad lights is just doing the job. So he thinks. Driving from Whittier to clock in, he gets to clock out, go home for Thanksgiving. He'll come back after the holidays, and years down the line, he'll get his pension. He's quick to judge and even quicker to grip, index finger above the trigger. He gets paid to keep the streets clean, but not of trash, of people like you and me.
Ayub, thank you for that wonderful poem. There was a line in there as though he were their own brother. And I think so many of us are trying to put that spirit into action right now. Thank you all for being with us tonight. I'm Eric Lorberer. I'm the director of Rain Taxi. It's a great pleasure to co-sponsor tonight's evening of translation. We've just celebrated our 30th anniversary, and thank you so much. For these past 3 decades, translation has been at the core of our mission. I don't even know what literature means without the translation in it. But it remains too often this secret, this hermetic ideal, and so we try to demystify that whenever we can, and point to the vitality and the amazing things happening in literatures around the world, because it's all our world as well. I'm just thrilled with our 3 translators tonight. All of them are authors and activists and devoted to literature in numerous ways. Robert Hedin, one of the architects of the community we live in, I think, one of the founders of the Anderson Center, that shining jewel on the hill just south of here. If you ever need your spirits lifted up, go there. You'll feel it. We feel it even from here, I think. Robert last spoke at a Rain Taxi event at our book festival in, I think, around 2010. And with his old pal, the late, great Robert Bly, laid on us the poetry of Olaf Hauge, great Norwegian modernist. Now we're going to hear the work of another Norwegian writer, all prose poems, Dag T. Stromsvag, The Mountains of Kong. This is a fantastic book, and I can't wait to hear from it and about it. Kaija Straumanis, we get to welcome to town as recently installed editorial director of our beloved Coffeehouse Press. Kaija is a translator of work from the Latvian. When I started reading The River, I was racking my brain. Have I ever read another Latvian novel? I don't think I have. And I'm thrilled with this one. It's extraordinary economical gem of a story by Laura Vinogradova. Can't wait to hear about that. And Ed Bach Lee. We were so thrilled at Rain Taxi to publish his translation, Smiling in an Old Photograph. And this new book that's just come out, Hail Che by Pak Chung Dae, expands for me the world of what is happening in Korean poetry. And it's extraordinary and capacious. And I'm so grateful that in addition to his command as an award-winning poet, Ed brings in the work of translation to what he has to offer to all of us. So 3 very dedicated people translating 3 very wonderful writers. It's going to be a fun evening. They'll read in the order, let's see, Robert, Kaija, and Ed. Yeah, they'll read in that order, and then we'll have a short conversation, and we'll make sure to include your questions as well. Please welcome Robert Hedin, Kaija Straumanis.
You can pull it up like that.
How's that?
First of all, I wish to thank Annie for being such a good host and hosting this. Closer to the mic. A little more. And of course to Ed, one of my all-time favorite poets, for his kind invitation to be a part of this evening. I wish to read 3 translations, all by Norwegian poets whose work I've translated for a better part of 40 years. First translation is an anti-war poem by Rolf Jakobsen, one of the most revered poets in 20th century Norway. Jakobsen was one of the very first to introduce modernism to Norwegian poetry, and his poems are filled with locomotives, factories, industrial things, very contrary to what had been written before Jakobsen showed up. To give this poem some historical context, it was written around 1950, at the start of the Cold War, the nuclear age. Europe was still digging out from the wreckage of World War II. The Korean War had started, and Vietnam was looming on the horizon. And 75 years later, I happened to translate this poem, and it was picked up and performed by the National Theatre of Norway, copies of which went out to all English-speaking countries in the world. It somehow was hoping to save the children of both Gaza and Israel. It's a poem entitled, When They Sleep. All people are children when they sleep. There's no war in them then. They open their hands and breathe in that quiet rhythm heaven has given them. They pucker their lips like small children and open their hands halfway. Soldiers and statesmen, servants and masters. The stars stand guard and the haze veils the sky. A few hours when no one will do anybody harm. If only we could speak to one another then, when our hearts are half-open flowers. Words like golden bees would drift in. God, teach me the language of sleep.
Did you do that last line again?
Last line of the poem.
Yeah.
God, teach me the language of sleep. This next poem is entitled One Poem a Day, and it's diametrically opposed to what you just heard from Jakobsen. This is a very light poem, fanciful, playful. It's entitled One Poem a Day by Olaf H. Hauge. Hauge was a contemporary of Jakobsen. Jakobsen lived close to Oslo, and Hauge lived way in the western fjord side of Norway. It's a poem about good intentions gone awry. So here it is, one poem a day. I'll write one poem a day, every day. That should be easy enough. Browning did it for a while, though he rhymed and beat time with his bushy eyebrows. So one poem a day, something strikes you, something occurs, something catches your eye. I get up, it's lighter, have good intentions, and see the bullfinch rising from the cherry tree, stealing buds. This last translation is a prose poem by Dag T. Straumanis. And Dag was born in 1964 and has worked as a farmhand, sawmill worker, librarian, and as a sound engineer at a local radio station in Trondheim. His poems tend to be quirky, quixotic, filled with an absurdist sense of humor. And this poem is entitled The Codfish, and is dedicated to all of you who just love lutefisk. Despite what marine biologists say, the codfish is not all that ravenous or tough. It doesn't devour everything that comes in its path, and it doesn't like desolate waters any more than the next fish. For thousands of years, it's patrolled the seams between warm and cold ocean currents, and rather recently showed the Europeans the way to America. The trouble is, the codfish can't remember a thing. It might swim to Labrador or Lofoten for 20 straight years and not recall any of it. On good days, its memory lasts maybe 3 seconds. Say, is that a herring or a lure? When mistaken, it won't put up a fight. It won't even try to slip off the hook. It's had enough and throws in the towel. Life's just not fair, or is it? The codfish really can't remember. Thank you.
Adjust it to my height. I think I'm wearing heels, so this should work. I'm going to echo what Robert said. I'm grateful to Ed for reaching out, and for Eric and Rain Taxi and Majors and Quinn. Just thank you everyone also for showing up tonight and supporting translation. If that's not why you're here, that's why you're here now, and thank you for your accident. Ed briefly convinced me that I'm going to read a little bit from the Latvian before I read the English. And as Eric said, The River is a very literally economical book. The writing is, on the face, very sparse, but Laura puts a lot in between the lines. So it's a very small book, but there's a lot to unpack. It's something that has lived with me since I've been working on it, or since I worked on it. And the general story is that there's a woman named Rotte who, when we meet her, she has fled the city, fled her life. We find out sort of later what's led to that, and she is staying in the riverside property of her estranged and recently deceased father, Yule. And I'm not going to read any of the parts where she writes letters to her sister, but some of the parts of the book are epistolary. She writes letters to her sister, where at the beginning of the book, there's a scene where either her sister is kidnapped, but we don't know what happens to her. And so Rotte writes these letters with the hope that one day her sister will get to see them. And in the section I'm reading, in the previous days, Rotte has met the neighbor at the riverside property, Matilda, who is very pregnant and who has a young son, Lucas. And later that same night, Matilda comes banging on the door. She has gone into early labor, and she asks Rotte to babysit Lucas while she takes herself to the hospital and until her brother Kristofs can come to town. And Rotte just says yes. And that's the scene that I'll be reading from. And a few lines in Latvian first. Otrā dienā viņš ir klāt. Kristofs. Rote atver durvis un izbīstās. Pretēji māsai viņš ir milzīgs. Pilnas durvis ar viņu. Pat vēsais gaiss neatrod spraugu, pa kuru viņam garām ieplūst istabā. Kristof! Iesaucas Lūkas un skrien milzam pretī. Puika ielec Kristofam rokās un iespiež seju viņa bārdā. Rota redz, ka Kristofs sāpē saviebjas, bet tūlīt pat savu sāpi apsauc un piekļauj Lūkasu sev cieši klāt. Vai Rota kādreiz redzējusi tik lielu maigumu? Tā viņa domā. He arrives on the second day. Kristofs. Rota opens the door and balks. He's a giant compared to his sister. The cool morning air can't even slip past him into the room. Kristofs! Lucas shouts and runs to him. The boy jumps into Kristof's arms and buries his face in his beard. Rota sees Kristof's wince in pain, but he stifles it and hugs Lucas tightly. Rota wonders if she's ever seen such tenderness. Then Kristofs looks to her. Hi, thanks for looking after Lucas. Mm-hmm, Rota grunts and waits. We'll be going now, Kristof says and touches his nose to Lucas's. As they leave, they glance back and Kristofs adds, if you need anything. Rota nods, but they don't see. The two figures walk off as she stands in the doorway thinking. Matilda had said that the other day too. Would they really help her if she asked? Would they rush over if she needed them? The house feels empty without Lucas. Rota hears a fly buzzing, hears the river through the window. She draws a deep breath and for the first time takes a good look around. Old floors, old windows, old stove and range. Old, old, old. It's the only word that comes to mind. Old shed and old flower beds, an old well and the old willow in the yard. The electricity had been cut when she'd first arrived several days ago. It had taken 2 days for her to figure out what the outstanding bill was so she could pay it, and another day before someone decided to get to work and turn the lights back on. The house has no central plumbing, just the outhouse around back. Drinking water comes from the well, and water for the dishes and laundry comes from the river. The water buckets themselves had been filthy. Rota spent a long time scrubbing them with sand from the river. She found a rake in the shed and cleaned up the yard. Old leaves and twigs. Old, everything old. Old crocuses in the flower bed, old lily of the valley. Old, but blooming nonetheless. Rota wants to bloom like that too. Let her stories, her past, lie with her, that's all fine, but she wants to bloom. The house has 2 bedrooms, one of which Eula had slept in, which is where Rota sleeps now. The second room is different entirely. There are a few blankets and a couple pillows laid out on the floor, a bookshelf along one wall filled with good but forgotten books. On the windowsill, a mug and an ashtray. Had people stayed in this room? Or maybe dogs? Was Eula a smoker? Rota knows nothing about her father, doesn't even remember what he looks like. When they told her, your father has died, Rota had wanted to say, again? Their whole lives, she and her sister thought he was already dead. They never looked for him and didn't ask their mother much about him either. When they did, she always told a different story. He'd been a good man, broad-shouldered, or he'd been a weakling and the scum of the earth. Or a fool. Their mother had said that once too. The village idiot. The girls never asked again. Not Dinah, not Rota. But now Rota is here, in their father's home. She lies down on his bed and inspects her hands. The blisters on her fingers are healing, the skin is inflamed and stings. She spent a lot of time with her hands in the cold river water, trying to scrub her father out of the house, so that she's the only one here. Then, Rota spends several days alone. No one comes looking for her. She reads Eula's books and sits by the river. One day, she finds an old bicycle in the shed and rides it to the only store around. She wanders the store and inspects the groceries for a long time, shopping with intent so she won't have to come back very often. The cashiers openly stare at her. Rota doesn't like that. She adds a tube of hand cream to her pile, pays, and leaves. Her backpack is heavy and the old bike is tough to pedal. She should oil it, but she doesn't have the first clue how to do that. Maybe ask Kristofs? Rota thinks and pedals, her cheeks flushed. No, better not. Rota doesn't want people. People were what she had wanted to get away from. Why turn to them now? She had walked away from people, from satin bed sheets, from a sink with hot and cold water, from a toilet that flushes, from an electric stove with a ceramic range, from a monthly appointment with her esthetician, from her hairstylist, from heated floors that allowed her to walk around barefoot all year. She'd even walked away from pedicures. Yes, the polish now almost completely chipped off. There's no nail polish remover in Eula's house, so that his toes are as they are. She does want to buy an electric kettle, though. Come summer, she can't light the stove each time she wants coffee. She doesn't need a television, doesn't want to know what's happening back in the city. All she brought was her computer, so she can write letters to her sister. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaija, and Robert, and Eric, and Ayub. This is the ASMR mic. If I fall asleep, don't blame me. Every plosive. All right. This is Hail Che. The full title of this book that I co-translated is Hail Che Guevara. And if you don't know, Che Guevara was an Argentinian-born Marxist revolutionary who was integral in the Cuban Revolution with Fidel Castro. And the book came out in 2014 and was blacklisted at the time because in South Korea when it came out, it had a dictatorial style president. South Korea did, Park Geun-hye, who has now been long removed. And Han Gang, another novelist whom you may have heard of, was also blacklisted, along with many other books and writers. It was then resurrected, and my co-translator and I decided to translate it. I should give some just very brief background that may help understand why there's many lists of artists and writers, and what Park Jung-dae, the author, we believe is trying to do is, this book imagines an international community of artists banding together against the soul-crushing forces of neoliberalism. And as I read, I'll just read two poems. You'll see, I think, what I mean in terms of the imagination and the role that the imagination plays in liberation. I'm just going to start with, these are some random lines that I picked from various poems, because there's so many poems, and a lot of them are long. And somehow they fit together. I've come to the revolution for all. Love is a kind of struggle to flare one's own flame. Let's get started. See what happens. Rapture in any dream begins at the point it deviates from the laws of physics. A new dividing line where revolution is born. A poet does things no one else can do. A revolution beneficial to all means we willingly become an outsider to ourselves. If the world doesn't change, what can a poor individual do? Except to realize one's failure is as concretely as possible. Revolution is an animal feeling. Only those who love survive. A boiling midnight revolution. I am a tiny wistful attachment at the beginning, at the far end of that wind, turning dreams into solid things. Today, I call you my music. So we're going to talk about translation in the process, and this is just one small example in the first of two poems I'm going to read of the translator's dilemma. So this poem, which in English, of course, is titled "I Want to Live Another Life." It has this line that is a line. As I was reading the book, I noticed that it sounded familiar, and so I'm going to recite the poem not this poem, but so there's some intertextuality going on. And so the poet quotes the line without attributing it by name to the poet who originally wrote the line. And so the question the editors and I and my co-translator had is, how should we communicate, without having a whole, explanation here on the page, how do we communicate, should we communicate to the reader that this is a reference, a nod, hat tip to a former poet from 100 years ago? We decided to put the name of the poet, Kim So-wol, who is a poet who lived, like I said, roughly 100 years ago. I don't have the dates on me right now. I think he was born in 1902 and died maybe 1932, somewhere along those lines. So you'll see, I'll read the line when I get to it, and then I'll kind of break off into the poem, and then I'll come back. I kick a ball, dreadlocks flapping. Maybe it was the peak of Bob Marley's life. There's a face that suddenly appears in my mind. What my life would be like if I'd spent my life with that person or this person. I imagine from time to time it's amazing that I still live on Earth. Many people I knew have already moved on to another planet. Since then, it seems no news from them. Sometimes over drinks, at night, alone. People I miss come to mind. I'm talking about those people whom when I think of Kim So-wol's long bygone line, shall I say I miss thee, I miss. And this is the line from the poem, 가는 길. 그립다, 말을 할까 하니 그리워, 그냥 갈까. 그래도 다시도 한번 저 산에도 까마귀, 들에 까마귀. 서산에는 해진다고 지적입니다. 앞 강물, 뒷 강물, 흐르는 물은 서 따라오라고, 따라가자고, 흘러도 연달아, 흐릅디다려. I'm talking about those people whom when I think of Kim So-wol's long bygone line, shall I say I miss thee? I miss. My music started from crying. Isn't that what Bob Marley said? While my music hasn't started yet, my crying has already ended. Juliana Avdieva, I listen to her piano repertoire. I want to live another life. I want to move to another planet rather than stay here in a life in a strange place where there's nobody I know. A new life in a place where shadows come to an end. I want to kick a ball, dreadlocks flapping, writing a poem on a yellowish coarse paper notebook bound with springs. I want to live different lives from day to day in a moving tent. A life that begins fluttering once again wherever the wind blows. A life unrelated to gravity. And then the second poem I'll read is entitled, That is the Wind of Infinity. And it's a direct address to Che Guevara, who's Ernesto. Ernesto, my friend, the unbearable loneliness of being makes me write this poem. In the morning, I unscrew a spoonful of soul and drink my coffee. That might be my way of mourning, a resolute ceremony to start the day well. When smoking in a corner attic on earth, I'm shut off from the season of the world. Inside this closed-off season, I open the window a bit and quietly read the weather of the world. A sentence of solitude. If there is such a sentence, should come here. If there is such a sentence, it should come here right now to be written. I am solitude, completed from the beginning. Therefore, I flow out from the heart of the world into the heart of another world while writing a letter of silence to you. Ernesto, my friend, I can hardly associate with anything in the world, so I'm death-defyingly lonely. I gaze at the road solitude has paved, at the horizon it is widened. I open the window to gaze at the landscape of tomorrow. I'm an angel of descent, a raindrop falling in a straight line between distant sky and the horizon. But now my poem wears the pants of clouds and wanders through the void. Now the only weapon I carry in my hand is futility, a solid solitude, grasping futility. I grasp the futility and become heat to infiltrate the insides of the world. Ernesto, my friend, the cigarette smoke I blow, I wish it were a flag that would shake the world and awaken sleeping souls. I wish I could shake the rotting landscape of capitalism spread out before my eyes and slap the back of its flatterers' parasitic heads. Many people die every day without so much as a groan, stuck in the laws established by those flatterers. It'd be nice if they could finally sigh. People here have long forgotten about freedom. People here have long set a way of life based solely on the instinct for survival. So today, as usual, I blow into the void the bellows of futility. The solitude of the world helps futility assemble leaves in the plaza. Ernesto, my friend, the only commander leading me now is coffee and cigarettes. Even in trivial remarks and jokes, the world tries to read the commander's face. Thanks to coffee and cigarettes, I dream of a revolution every morning. Now I write a poem for the human race. It's the hour of the angel. Tonight, today, as usual, I borrow the overcoat of an angel to write this poem. I grow a coffee tree and tend to tobacco fields by myself. The coffee I drink and the cigarettes I smoke come from there. That is my revolution. Infinite freedom infused with a longing for something, and the new world dreamt of by that freedom exist at the opposite ends of our self-centeredness. All sorts of tramps who wander the world, spaceships that can't return to inner earth, people who have given up on life. The sole force that gathers them together comes from a massive heart of goodwill. The wiggling of a delicate yet intense will, a will to improve the world, already exists in a flutter of the wind. To decipher the wind's will with one's desperate mind, that requires the overcoat of an angel. Ernesto, my friend, I eat only one meal a day. It's not because of a food shortage, but because with only one meal a day, humans can still dream. Friend, as someone once said, humans descend from the world of dreams. However, after descending from one world of dreams, humankind has not yet settled into another world of dreams. Therefore, I'm now trying to speak another world of dreams by borrowing your name from a prison of words spit out by humans, from a cruel prison embedded with human languages. Let's liberate the breath, a new world starting in the land of solitude, dreams of a vast land of freedom. Let's have it. A dream factory. Let's have the hands of citizens hold a dream, not a gun. Let's have loving emotion cover up the earth like an uncontrollable flood. Ernesto, my friend, let's restore the heart of nature. In autumn, ginkgo leaves attend a yellowish picnic. Birds discharge themselves of their tiring duty in the air and descend to the ground to take a rest. Let's release just one fresh word like a single horse from humanity's corrupt mouth to go galloping across the virgin prairie. Let's have that word gallop across the earth of humans as if it were the very first horse in human history. On rainy days, let's embrace the rain like thirsty trees. On snowy days, let's shake hands with the falling snowflakes, listening in on their news of distant snowflakes. Ernesto, my friend, I take off shoes and change into running shoes. I take off stiff shoes and change into running shoes, like a sheet from a secret map that would guide me to a new world. The morning breeze spreads out toward the infinite. The roadside trees go on walking into the season, smiling from the very beginning. This was humankind's Mother Earth. To the very end, it should remain Mother Earth of humankind. Now solitude cooperates with the world and reticence helps it. I move my body and play music to an inner side of humanity. I wear the overcoat of an angel, write a poem, and breathe into the body of the human race. Ernesto, my friend, from dreams we dream together, from companionship we share together. A new land is sprouting forth. That is humanity's hometown. The wind of infinity blows. Infinity's love is shaking me.
You can share, and you guys can share. That seem okay? Oh, thank you for those readings. Wow. We have traveled the globe a little bit here, almost sequentially. Norway, Latvia, South Korea, and back to Minnesota. Thank you again. I have so many burning questions, and of course I want us to also get into the nitty-gritty a little bit of the common purpose of translation, writing it and reading it, actually, but specifics as well. So let me start with you, Kaija. Latvia, again, I'm like, it's one of the Baltic countries for sure. And what is the literary tradition that produces a writer like this, who I think is a tremendous writer based on this book, and is very young, from what I can tell. Yeah, give us a little bit of that trajectory, and also your own place in it, how you come to translate these works. Yeah.
Oh, is it on? Is it? Hello?
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh. Okay. You could have lied to me. That's a very good question. Lots of questions in that question. I think one of the reasons, first and foremost, why I was drawn to this book is because it is so unlike what I think of as the classic Latvian literary canon. It is very, like I said, it's very sparse. As you noticed, it's very sparse. There's a lot happening between the lines. And I think that's really why, because it said so much in such a little space of time. And I think that the other books that I've read and the books that I've worked on are far more expansive. A lot of it, when I first started getting more into reading and working with Latvian literature, my takeaway was that a lot of the literary obsession was with existing in a post-Soviet country. It's an integral part of the identity. It's a part that you cannot take away, and it's always going to be there. Although at the same time, there seems to be a point where it would be kind of okay if you could write without that as the crutch. And that's not to say that I think that authors in Latvia are using that as a crutch, but it was very noticeable to me when I first started working with Latvian literature. And I think The River, part of what removes it from that sort of pool is that, with the exception, I think, of a couple small things, it's a book that could take place in any European city. You know, we're talking about a riverside property. It has a lot to do about grief and working through that grief, different types of grief. And so it does position itself as a more universal work of literature. And other than that, excuse me, I think Latvia has off and on had really good success with short form fiction. So this book is actually one of 3 in the translator triptych from Open Letter Books. And with Latvian authors, there were two other triptychs, one from Spain, one from South Korea prior to that, and the next one's going to be from Iceland. And the idea is to have the translator be a curator and pick 3 works representative of something. And my triptych, I curated this one that includes the river. I wanted to focus on that short form fiction because I think that there's a lot that can be done, and maybe that's one of the keys with Latvian literature and with the writers, is that the shorter you can make it, the more you can say without getting lost in that windy, historical, post-Soviet mentality. And just really quick about my own personal background, I'm 2nd generation Latvian American, grew up speaking in the home. Both my parents are from Latvian families, and that's kind of how I wound up where I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and thank you for the explanation. I tried to ask that question without politics in it, thinking that that a former Soviet country had that pressure within it. Ed, some of that pressure feels present in the work of Pak Chung-dae. The identity of a person whose very country has two sides, and this sort of capacious imagination or sort of visionary look on all of history, all of literature, even literature we don't hear about unless it's from a secret the translator knows. Can you talk about that history within the work?
I thought about this a lot because when I translate, I don't do it very often, but I need to get into character. I need to kind of, especially like with poetry, I've done prose and fiction, and it's slightly different. But for poetry, I need to really get in character on the wavelength of a particular poet I'm translating, and if you ask any actors, they create their own characters, and every actor is going to come to it differently. And so, if another, translator or translators translated Pak Chung-dae, it would be very different. So for me, I had to rationalize this, as you put it, this capacious, these long, sometimes lists of artists and musings on art, and in some ways, it's very much a writer's. It's about the act of writing poetry, which, how can I put it? It's like he's a writer's writer in that way, and some really cool insights on the act of writing poetry and making art. But for me, the way I kind of entered is to think of something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that's how the imagination can be traumatized. In my opinion, I think that's what we're living through right now. We're living through people in power who have clearly been traumatized, and I don't just mean on a personal level, but on a political level. If you read Netanyahu's biography and his history, his personal history, you understand, okay, yes, this is the result. Trump has a very different history, but you begin to see, you look at his relationship in his family with his father and his ancestors, and his mother came here as a somewhat of an indentured servant and was a housemaid in a very wealthy family, coming as an immigrant from Scotland or Ireland, does anyone know? So in thinking about the imagination like that, how do you liberate the imagination from the shackles of trauma? And that's kind of the mode of thought I approached this work with.
Well, more gratitude for it then. There's I'm certainly having a deep conviction, a recommitment to the idea that books, literature can help us, can practically help us with this problem, and I think you're articulating some of the reasons why that might be true. So let's keep that in the mix, but I want to check in with you, Robert, because so it was so interesting to hear you read a sample each, essentially, from Helga Jakobsen and Straumanis, and of course it was like, oh yes, this poet is in the lineage of these modern masters, and yet so whimsical by comparison, at least on the surface. How do you see that trajectory, having immersed yourself in the language of all three?
I'm not sure that Straumanis is part of that lineage. He comes from a whole different influence, and most of those influences are American poets, American prose poem poets, and he has read them voraciously, and in many cases they have influenced his work. Lewis Jenkins is probably his primary influence, and as far as Jakobsen and Helga are concerned, they are just two different animals, absolutely different. One was very, I think you could say, highly polished, and I think that I'm talking about Jakobsen, and I think he was after the great poem. He was wanting to write the great poem, and you want to know what? He did. There are about 4 or 5 of his poems that are just some of the finest you'll find in all of 20th century, regardless of geography, regardless of political state. They are just remarkable creations. Howard, on the other hand, was not necessarily after the great poem. He was after something, being a poet of place. He was after all of rendering the daily occurrences. He kept a diary from the age of about 16 all the way up through the rest of his life. They've been compiled into 5 voluminous texts, and the man was highly committed to writing down and rendering those moments that occurred in his very pastoral life. So these are 3 very different poets whose work I've worked on for many years. And each one filled a space in me when I was translating them.
Tell us more about that, because that is so beautifully put as to the relationship that can blossom between a translator and their poets or their writers. But also, Straumanis is still living, obviously, and I think you said was born in 1964. So really is, you've gone from translating these modernist masters to a person immersed in the contemporary. And what's the difference for you in that as well?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Oh, do you have a different? For example, you can presumably talk. You've translated this with the author, so you do talk about the translations, and that wouldn't have been true for the others.
As said a couple of times, I've concentrated on those 3 poets over the last 40 years, and in each case, it was a very different experience. With Jakobsen, I made sure that I did not look at any other translations, knowing, of course, that they were there. And so it was just Jakobsen and me, and I was making many, many flaws, many errors. And I have to say that one of the most remarkable experiences was working in Jakobsen. I published a little chapbook with the Mid-American Review. They have a chapbook series that they publish in each of their issues. And after that came out, I received a letter from Roger Greenwald, who teaches at the University of Toronto is probably the finest translator of Scandinavian poetry that we have. And Greenwald read those translations that I did for the Mid-American Review and offered suggestions and corrections, and it went on for six pages. I learned a tremendous amount from what Greenwald was saying. As far as Olaf Hauge goes, I checked out almost all of the translations that I did of Hauge's work. And as you know, that they're very aphoristic. And so they're just like little bonbons or so, absolutely wonderful. With Hauge's wife, Bodil, who he married much later in his life. He married her when he was about 7. It was a classic Scandinavian courtship. And as Robert Bly writes in his introduction to the book that we did together, that when Olaf and Bodil were married, things in the house became a lot chirpier. But at any rate, I would send the poems to Bodil, and she would go through them and really help me out. And as far as Dag goes, when we first started working, translating his poems, he was not very good in English. And so in many cases, I was not the translator at all, though we did put in the hours going over the poems. I was more of a custodian, clearing up the language, clearing up verb tense, subject and verb tense, and that sort of thing. And it's been very interesting I think we've been working together for 15, if not 20 years, and it's been very interesting to see how his knowledge of English has evolved. Perhaps the biggest problem we had was the rendering of humor in his poems. And as those of you who have read some of Dag's work, you know that there are some very, very funny poems in there. And we know that humor in one country does not necessarily translate into another. And so it was really hard work trying to get that humor and how it would work into English. And I think we did it. It was a struggle, but we did it. And I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And I also want to say, yes, you did it. I laughed out loud quite often. And among the American prose poets that Straumanis was reading, I would wager also, aside from Lewis Jenkins, were probably James Tate, Russell Edson, Charles Simic, very much in the spirit. Was he reading them in English, though, or in a translation? Okay. Ed and Kaija, a similar question. Have either of you been interacting with your authors as you do the translation, or is it a totally separate world? Peel back the curtain a little bit for us on how that works.
Yes, specifically with Lauda's book, I had the honor and pleasure to be together with her for a couple weeks at the Art Omiletic House in the Hudson Valley in New York. They do a translation lab program, and she and I applied. And yeah, so we had 2 weeks. We would take walks a couple times a day, I think, around the area and just talk things through. And it was, for this book, I think for most of the authors I've worked on, they've all been living, and so I've had the opportunity to either speak to them by email or meet with them. But this experience with Lauda was, truly once in a lifetime, and I got to learn so much about where the book came from for her, which also kind of completely reshaped how I had originally read the book. I originally read the book as a woman's struggle to deal with gestures ambiguously at world, and I, we're coming out of COVID, and I kind of felt, some I don't know, that resonated with me in that sense. But then after talking with her, and I'd also lost my own father a few months before the residency, relearned that this was a grief book. It's not a book about being fed up with the world. It's a book about grieving. It can be grieving the world, grieving with things that are going on, grieving a loss, grieving a change. And that's not something that I think everybody gets when they translate. It's not something I get with every author who I translate. But I think without that experience, I wouldn't have, there is definitely something, she and I have not been working together as long as Robert has with his authors, but that's a very positive experience to be able to do something like that and to understand. Contrary to what Robert was saying, Lauda has very little English, I think more so now than in 2023 when we had this residency. So that was kind of a bonus because she would have to trust me. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room with this book, but that was also an interesting experience because there are authors who are very involved. As Robert was saying, there are authors who are like, don't want to know, just very excited and glad for the opportunity, God bless. And then authors who are somewhere in the middle where they want the best for their book in English.
Yeah, my experience is the complete opposite. I've never corresponded or interacted or met the poet Park Chan-dae. I don't know that I would recognize him in a room. I think I've seen the person I translated this with, Yang Eun-mi, who lives in South Korea, has, I believe, emailed a few times with him, but he was like, you just do your thing. He was very, incredibly hands-off. We had to guess at some things, which I was fine with, if he was fine with it. Octavio Paz, the Mexican poet translator, says a poem, needs to be, when you translate it, recreated in the new language, and therefore, in his view, the more the translator is a poet and can recreate the poem in a new language, the better the translation will be. And I think, from what I gather, Pak is of that mind, that it is out of my hands, you make it into whatever you will make it into.
Yeah, and well, there's a generosity there, and also and a trust, as you mentioned. I think that's amazing. But also, even in the I Want to Live Another Life poem, the sense that this speaker is already half on another planet. They're already their world is very gossamer, and they have a less attachment maybe to stuff like that. Yeah, these are really remarkable books. I have to say, it's very rare when anyone gets 3 for 3 past me. So I'm really thrilled. One last note here before we take a few audience questions. I can't remember if you said this earlier, Kaija, but it turns out that Rita is a translator, and that is a detail that really adds nuance to, when we find it, I think.
Yes, I feel like you're trying to catch me off guard here, but it is a detail. Truly, it's a detail. The book does not hinge on that, but it is mentioned where, that her job was as a freelance translator. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that that the sort of compressed portrait of her now has this kind of meta level happening. Not a correspondence, obviously, but and Ed, you were earlier talking about the sort of concepts about the act of writing being embedded in the work, and I found that really in any strong writer maybe to be true across the board. That is something I end up thinking about if they're doing their job. So, but anyway, all of these books are gems. Might there be any audience questions? Dobby.
Yeah, I want to follow up on Ed's quote from Paz, this idea that a successful translation has to be recreated from another language. does that make it, do you think, easier to translate from Korean into English, like a language that's very different versus going from like a Romance language to English? Because you're more liberated to make those creative choices, or am I reaching for something here?
Many years ago, I studied Russian literature and language in college, and I translated Russian into English, and that I found what you're talking about to be more the case. Korean, so Russian is closer to English, and it was sort of like, if I tell you to write a poem, any of you, write a poem about love. Some may be good, some of you might struggle, it might take you a while. If I tell you to write a sonnet, about love, that would help you because it gives you the vessel, the form. If I say, write a sonnet about butterflies, okay? Try to get love in there somewhere, anywhere, it doesn't matter. That would probably go better for most people. So Russian is sort of like the sonnet that I could fill in more. Korean has no correlation with English whatsoever. And so it's like working in a different dimension in terms of like English and Korean. It's a Euro-Altaic language. It's a language isolate, which means they don't exactly know where it comes from. There are theories. It's related to linguistically more closely to Finnish than Chinese in the grammar, is what I'm told, my linguist friends say. Of course, Korean borrows a lot of Chinese words, but the grammar is incredibly different. And so, yeah, for me, I think it helps. We can talk very briefly about heritage translation. I am second generation Korean, so I did grow up hearing and speaking some, but hearing it, and it kind of, I feel it. Reading it, even if I don't know the words or the phrases or the references, I feel it at some level, blood level. August Wilson says memory lives in the blood. I feel something and can give body and shape to it, but it's a very different thing. It's much more intuitive than when I'm translating from Russian.
Anyone else? Jim, yeah.
Well, I've been led in various circles. I brought my copy of Robert Fry's 8 Stages of Translation, and I reviewed it today, and it doesn't say anything I remembered it said. And what I remember it said was step 1, and you guys have touched on this in many ways, it's important to have the ear of a native speaker, because that speaker knows the nuance of a language that you will never know, can never hear. It's not. And the final goal, which is what Ed said, essentially his final goal is you want the poem to sing in the new language. In the case of prose, you grew up with it ear, you're hearing it. In a certain way, Ed did too. Your last comment, Ed, struck me. I think of my friend who was a tabla player, and his daughter never formally studied the tabla. And one day, she walked out on stage, and she could play the tabla because he'd been practicing in the house her whole life. And she knew the rhythm. It was unbelievable, but it's somewhat what you're saying, that the rhythm, even though you didn't know it, nobody's taught you the vocabulary, the rhythm is somehow in your ken, in your life ken. Very interesting. I don't know. So what is it about the two things? You know the first language. You didn't know the first language. And Robert's a mystery because Robert's been hanging around with Norwegian for, 50 years?
I'm not that old.
But how do you feel, I know you do Norwegian so much and Swedish, do you feel you need to go to a native speaker to start, or to get comfortable with the process, or do you feel?
I don't speak Norwegian.
Yeah, I know.
I certainly do read it, and somewhat of Swedish. When my family and I moved back to Red Wing after 25 years apartment centers, and they were on their last legs, and I would take my Swedish translations over to these old men, and we'd sit in the dusky light of these apartments, and they would show me where I went wrong. And what was so beautiful about it all was the fact that they still spoke in accent. And I could hear it, and it brought back all the memories of when I was a boy. And my grandmother would have friends come over, and they would speak Swedish with each other. And I, of course, had no idea what they were saying, so I would listen to the music of it, and it was just beautiful. So I don't speak the language, but I do read it.
And you know what the music is, that's fantastic.
I do have can I make a comment back to what Dottie was talking about? I think there's a difference between recreation and reproduction. I don't think it's not a limitless universe that a translator lives in when one is recreating. There are, unlike the Trump administration, there are guardrails. But I do think that is probably the goal of every translator is to reach that stage of recreation as opposed to just a reproduction. A reproduction I would define as something literal, a literal translation. And I hate to do this, but I'll dump on the academics that the worst translators are those who are sitting in the language departments and in the English departments of various universities, because they are almost without fail, they are literal translators. They are reproducing literal translations, and the poems just fall clunk on the floor. And I think that the best translators of poetry have always been poets, because it deals with the nuances, with the rhythms, the balance, the overall pacing, and that sort of thing.
Oh, I wanted to say to Ed's point and Robert's point and to both questions' points, I think one of the most important skills of being a good translator is also being a good reader. So I think some of these questions about understanding the musicality, yes, of the original language, you need to understand the musicality of the language that you were translating into. You are a poet, so your poetry translations are going to, you know how poetry is supposed to sound, how it can sound in English also. You know how prose poetry, how poems are supposed to sound. I know what prose sounds like. I'm also an editor. I know how it can sound in English, what all the games you can play, and you do carry those games over from the source languages, from the original languages, but you need to be a good reader as well in order to be a good translator, because not that academics are poor readers, but if they're looking for a one-to-one solution, they're ignoring the literary aspect of it, or they are in danger of ignoring the literary aspect of it.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yes, please.
I agree with everything you said, and that's why AI is so dangerous in translation. But I have a little anecdote, if I may. I was at an event like this with Will Self, the British writer, and I asked what his relationship was with his translators, because he's been translated into many languages. And he said, well, most of them, it's fine, they'll send me questions. But my French translator, he said, seems to think he wrote the book. To which I said, he did. So I think that's the difference. When you are translating, you have to, it's like trying to cook the same meal with different ingredients. You can't do it, but you have to make something that's an equivalent. Not just literarily, but emotional equivalent.
Absolutely, and I want to say one more, a return anecdote, and the reason I wanted to bring that up, that you have to be a good reader in order to also be a good translator. I had an author friend in Latvia ask me if I would translate a short story or something for a magazine, and I was like, yes, I would love to have George Saunders translated into Latvian. And I did it, and I sent it to him, and as I'm translating, I'm like, I'm so funny, this is great, it'll land. And he wrote me the nicest, meanest email where he was like, if Latvian to English is like he said hobby horse, but he didn't mean it that negated. Is your hobby horse? You should stick to your hobby horse. And I was just like, message received, because I can read the Latvian prose, but I have not grown up writing Latvian prose. I've grown up writing English prose. I've grown up creative writing in English. So it was a humbling moment, but at the same time, it's not wrong.
Right. One last one, and then we'll move to the book signing.
Okay.
Yes.
This is for you, it's related to what you just said, Kaija. When Eric asked you about Latvian literary tradition, you used the phrase in your answer, the post-Soviet crutch. And I wondered if you would maybe parse that out a little bit further, what that looks like, and whether or not you think it's related to the traumatized imagination that Ed was referring to.
I think absolutely it's related to traumatized imagination. I mean, the literature that I grew up reading in Latvian school, it was a lot of poetry, and it was a lot of poetry that was written by poets in exile or authors in exile, or it was poetry that was subversive, and you had to read between the lines because they didn't want Russian authority to understand that they were calling to arms or trying to get people into this mindset of we are Latvia, we are Latvia. And the post-Soviet mindset can be anything from, describing the architecture, the sort of closed-off emotions of things. Anything from, I'm trying to think of the first book I translated, to what it's like to travel outside of the country for the first time after Soviet rule. The items that are available to you in stores, the literature that's available to you, the content that they're consuming. And yeah, sometimes it's honestly just the architecture. People, there's still a lot of the Soviet bloc apartment buildings that exist throughout Eastern Europe. And I think it becomes, it is so much a part of the setting, the physical setting, as well as the geography and the mentality.
Of a story.
Of the story, yeah, and the writers' lives, because a lot of these authors that's what they grew up with. That's how they grew up. So it is truly what they know. And I think it's hard to, I don't want to say that they should divorce themselves from that, but I think they are also products of their environment, and they're not getting the same literature all the time that we're getting in the United States or elsewhere in the world, or they weren't. Now, they have TikTok. It's fine.
Follow up on that briefly. Any idea that there's a younger generation that didn't grow up with the Soviet gulag hanging over them that looks at the world differently? Feel freer, if you will? Or maybe not enough time has elapsed, I don't know.
That's a good question. I have not looked into that many new authors or younger authors, but I'm just thinking of the people who I know. I think a lot of it is, they're living in the modern world like the rest of us. They're building tech companies, they have startups, they have PR firms, and they're less concerned with that maybe. But yeah, the world's moving on, yeah.
Well, we'll be moving on to the book signing table up front, and